Special thanks to our promotional partners at the American Philatelic Society.
The APS is the largest stamp collecting organization in the world, supporting collectors of any level worldwide.
For more information about membership and APS services, visit stamps.org. I'm Charles Epting from H.R. Harmer in New York City.
I'm Michael Cortese of Noble Spirit in Pittsfield, New Hampshire.
And this is Conversations with Philatelists. Michael, we're back.
We are. I'm excited. I really am.
Last time we took a little break. We explained that we're busy.
Yeah.
Obviously our businesses come first. We still love doing this. We're going to get back into it as frequently as we can. But we've both had a couple of big collections walk in the doors, and again, obviously that takes precedence. So it's been a bit of a hiatus again, but I'm really looking forward to getting back into it, especially with today's special guest. This is going to be a really fun one.
Yeah. So today we've got Jean Wang. She's an associate professor of medicine at the University of Toronto and staff hematologist and clinician scientist at the Princess Margaret Cancer Society in Toronto, Canada. That's a mouthful.
That is a mouthful. Basically, she's a hematologist. She's still a mouthful. She's a blood doctor. She deals with blood, and she has managed to take that career path and turn it into a philatelic collection and exhibit. And I'm super excited to hear about that today. The other thing I will mention is Dr. Wang has generously agreed to share her screen and show us some of the material in her exhibit. So if you're listening to this on a podcasting service, you may want to jump over to YouTube so that you can see. We'll do as good a job as we can explaining everything, but I think that a picture is worth.
It's never sufficient.
It is not. It's worth much more than 1,000 words in this case. So this is one. Most of it will probably be listenable, but there is a chunk of it that I expect will be viewable as well. So maybe hop on over to YouTube if you're listening to us right now, or keep listening and then watch on YouTube so we get double the listens and views.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Because that we're super into our metrics.
Yeah.
There's nothing we care more about.
But before we introduce her, glad to be back. Looking forward to it. We got 4 or 5 guests lined up.
We're lining them up again. Absolutely. When it rains, it pours. So
yeah.
It's exciting to be back on back in front of the camera again. I'm excited for this. And what do you say we bring Dr. Jean Wang in?
Absolutely. Here we go. So, Jean, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, it's great to chat with you guys.
Absolutely. So, to kick things off, do you mind talking a little bit about your beginning in the hobby, how you got started collecting, and a little bit of your journey since then?
So I think my story is probably similar to a lot of collectors. I collected when I was little. My dad used to bring home stamps, torn up envelopes from work, and nobody else in my family collected. So I had to kind of figure out what to do with all that stuff. And so I collected, whatever he brought home. And then later on, I started some country collections. And then I put stuff away when I went to school and I didn't have as much time. And then I guess it was after we got married and we had bought some new furniture, and I was taking stuff out of our old furniture, and I rediscovered all my albums that I had stored in there. So, and at that time, I think it was in the sort of mid to late 80s, the internet was around, so you could find stuff without actually having physically to go to shows and things. And I connected with collectors. So I did that. And then maybe about 10 years ago, I started to get involved with organized philately. So I joined an online stamp forum called Stamp Boards. And a year or two later, I joined a local stamp club here, North Toronto Stamp Club. And that's really when I started, becoming more and more involved. And as I said, actually being participating in organized philately, as opposed to sort of just doing my collecting on my own in my basement kind of thing.
So what made you seek out organized philately? What made you look?
That's what I was going to ask as well, because there's a lot of people, especially in today's day and age, where you can collect in a solitary way on the internet, or even interact with people via Instagram and Twitter and whatnot, but there are people who never make that jump into joining a society or going to shows or exhibiting. So what was it that made you want to explore it further rather than just keeping it a a solo hobby.
Yeah, I don't remember what the exact stimulus was, but probably it was, I was, just searching on the internet looking for some information. And my searching probably led me to stamp boards, which is a huge bulletin board with tons of information, lots of people with lots of knowledge on different parts of philately. And I did lurk there for a little while because I wasn't, at that point, I had never really participated online in any kind of social media or anything like that. And so it took me a little while before I started posting questions and comments. But once I started, it got easier. And then I don't know, it just kind of stimulated this desire to connect with other collectors. And so I kind of actually, how I got connected with the local stamp club. So it's a funny story because I was going into my local Canada Post outlet to mail covers all the time and, putting nice stamps on the covers. And so the clerk said to me one time, oh, these are really nice covers. I guess they weren't used to people kind of going in and mailing, covers with nice stamps and stuff. And she said, oh, there's another elderly gentleman who comes, he's a collector and he's got a post office box here and he sends a lot of mail and stuff. And do you want to connect with him? So at that point I had already kind of joined stamp boards and I thought it'd be good to sort of connect with other collectors. And so I said, sure. So she connected us actually. So he invited me to go to a stamp club meeting with him. He belonged to, I think, several clubs, but the first one that he took me to was the Toronto Stamp Collectors Club, which was, I think, it's a smaller club. They actually haven't been very active through the pandemic, and it's mostly older collectors, and their meetings were basically kind of sitting around a table and doing kind of a show and tell. So I have to admit, it wasn't horribly exciting for me. But then he also belonged to the North Toronto Stamp Club, and I went to one of their meetings with him. And North Toronto is a much more, I think it's a much more active club. There's more active membership. There's a wider range of ages of the collectors. And so I decided to join the North Toronto Stamp Club. I think that's how things sort of got started for me. And it's a very active exhibiting club too. So around that time, I had, because of what I had sort of seen on stamp boards, I actually had started a topical collection. So up till then, I'd really only just been a country collector. I collected a few countries, including Canada. And I was probably looking for, a new angle because, there, at some point in a country collection, it starts to get really expensive, right? I mean, you're just looking at some of the,
right.
the more expensive stuff. So I was looking for something else that was kind of a new angle. And so I decided to start a topical collection. And then when the North Toronto exhibiting chair found out that I was doing this, he, really encouraged me to put together an exhibit, which I eventually did. So I think it was probably a year or two after I joined the club. And so it's just kind of gone from there.
When it comes time to start, because I think it would be too generous to say that I've collected topically, but there's always things that if I see them, I'll pick them up, whether it's dinosaurs or whatnot. But when it comes time to put together a topical collection, obviously there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. The stamps that depict the topic, for example, I'm sure you can go out and find a lot of material very easily. But where do you go from there? What other avenues do you take it? What was sort of your thought process in putting together a topical? Again, if it's dinosaurs on stamps, you can just go out and look for modern souvenir sheets with dinosaurs all day long. But when it came time to maybe expand it into an exhibit more than just a collection, what was sort of your thought process behind what you had to go out and find in terms of material?
Yeah. So actually, I find a lot of collectors, like even collectors that are very traditional, have postal history collections or whatever. A lot of them, if you talk to them, they have like a little side topical collection, and it's often connected to stuff, that what they did as their profession or, whatever. So for me, I'm a hematologist. So I decided to collect stamps on blood donation and blood transfusion. And Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The first thing I did was try and get all the stamps I could find that were directly, showing blood donation or blood transfusion. But as I was searching for these, so one of my big sources are like online auction sites like eBay and Delcamp. So when you search on Delcamp, a lot of things pop up when you put in blood donation or blood transfusion. So you start to realize that there's postmarks, and there's slogan cancels, and there's postal stationery, and it's really interesting, right? Because I mean, a lot of those have really there's the slogans can themselves be very interesting, but the postal stationery envelopes have a lot of interesting illustrations on them. And it was just it was something I had never considered before. I'd always been just a stamp collector, and all of this stuff was really quite new to me. And so I started to really search for that stuff. And I'm in contrast to country collections where you just, you have your album pages and all the spaces, and you have to fill all the spaces, right? So if it's a complete collection or not, depending on how deep you want to go. With a topical or a thematic collection, it's like sky's the limit, right? Like there are lots of things out there, but there's no complete catalog of all the postmarks and all the slogans. And so there's not this sense of completion, which is good in a way, because it just means that you never feel like you're failing at it, right? Like you can't complete it, and really you can define the limits of what you want to collect, right? So I found stuff directly related to blood donation transfusion, but I started to you can find stuff that's maybe a little more tangentially related too. So and now I've branched into all different aspects of medical philately. Just as I've gone along, it became harder and harder to find new stuff in my blood donation collection. So then I started to, look at other stuff, like collect like advertising. There's a lot in the US, but I'm concentrating on Canada. But early medical advertising covers, like a lot of sort of quack medicine, snake oil kind of, advertising, which is really cool. So I've branched out into other aspects. And during the pandemic, I was collecting COVID related stuff. Lots of interesting stuff there too, not just stamps, but postmarks and all kinds of other stuff too.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly kind of what you were saying there. Is not only is it less finite, but it's so much broader topical collecting, because you were defining it, and there's no just spots to fill. Did you find you already had some of the items in your country collections that you were able to pull out and then put into your topical collections? It can, as you get into the more modern stuff, get tough to find things, or if you will, because you find maybe you have to buy complete year sets in order to get that set, because it catalogs $1, but it might be vital to your exhibit or something like that. So
yeah, so my country collections were used collections. So except for Canada, I have a Mint Canada collection too. So in my topical collection, I was really trying to just get mint stamps.
Yeah.
So there, there wasn't really a lot of overlap between what I had already had in my collections and what I was trying to find for my topical.
I sort of have a two-part question. The first is, when you collect something that you are so close to, it's your profession, it's your life outside of stamps. Do you find it difficult ever to construct a narrative because you're maybe like a bit too close to the subject matter, and you're I don't know. I just feel like it might be difficult to use stamps to tell the story of something so well. And then conversely, second part of the question is there ever a story you're trying to tell and you wish there was the perfect fillet? You've got this theory or this practice that you want to include in the story, and there's just no stamp or postmark or cover or anything that illustrates it. Do you ever wish there was a philatelic item to fill a gap in a story that you think is important to tell?
Yeah. So let me step back for 1 second. So the difference between like a topical collection and a thematic collection is a topical collection really is like you're just trying to collect everything you can find that has a picture of your topic, right? So all the stamps that depict blood donation or blood transfusion or slogans, everything that's directly related. Whereas a thematic, if you're building a thematic exhibit or a collection, you start to delve into all these other storylines, right? Like how, what's the history of blood or the symbolism of blood? Why is blood important? How were blood groups discovered? How did transfusion medicine, how did the science get established? And it's all related to the wars, right? The need for blood to treat wounded soldiers during wars. So those are all part of the story, but they're not, you're not going to be able to illustrate that with stuff that directly shows blood donation or whatever. You have to find peripheral stuff. So, you asked me, do I know? I think what you're asking me is, I have my sort of medical knowledge, and how do I translate that to something that is accessible by a lay person, right? So,
Yes.
So in my practice, I have to explain things to patients all the time, right? And I also write research grants, and we have to write abstracts for a lay audience because there are lay people on the review panels too. So I've gotten, I have experience in how to explain things to people in plain language, so that it's, so it's not too technical, so it's understandable. And in a thematic exhibit, you want to kind of explore different kinds of storylines. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes you want to tell a story, and there's nothing on stamps to illustrate it. So you have to be a little creative then, right? So, there's lots of examples in my exhibit where I have a particular storyline, but it's maybe something that it's a concept or something that, it's a bit hard, like it's a principle or concept that you can't just show as a picture on a stamp. But you can find, if you're creative, you can sometimes find philatelic items that can help you illustrate that. So just think, so as an example, I talk about when blood is collected and, they test the blood for infectious viruses, and then they treat the blood to kill any potential viruses. So, you can use a cover that was disinfected, right? So during the early, for smallpox or cholera or whatever, they used to use all kinds of different methods for disinfecting covers. So it's a way to it's a kind of metaphor to kind of illustrate something that, you might not be able to find a stamp or a postmark for. So you can have a lot of fun in thematics that way.
Do you ever share your exhibit with other people in your field?
Like my medical colleagues?
Yeah.
So actually early on when I was starting it, it's probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, I did actually, so the very first stamp, I think, that kind of hooked me into this whole history of transfusion medicine was a stamp from Romania, actually. So Romania, a lot of countries kind of issued millennium stamps, right? Like events of the millennium kind of thing, right? And famous people and whatever. So one of them was Karl Landsteiner, who described the ABO blood groups back in 1900. So they had a picture of him on the stamp, and they had the ABO blood groups, but they also had these Roman numerals. And I didn't really know what they were. I hadn't learned about those in medical school. And so I asked one of my colleagues who's a transfusion medicine specialist, because my practice is general hematology, and I do leukemia research. I'm not a transfusion medicine specialist, but there were not enough stamps on leukemia. So that's why I picked blood transfusion. But anyway, so I asked one of my colleagues, and he said, oh yeah, there was another guy who came up with some other blood group classification, a Czech. It turned out, so he was a Czech neurologist who was trying to find a link between blood groups and mental illness. And of course, he didn't find any kind of link, but he discovered the 4 main blood groups, and he made a numerical classification. So that's what was on this stamp. So that's kind of what hooked me into it. So, so after that, anytime I found something interesting, I would share it with my colleague. And then eventually he asked me to give a presentation to they had monthly transfusion medicine rounds. And so I gave them a talk, and then someone there heard that talk, and then they were organizing a Canadian transfusion, like a big national meeting, and they invited me to give the keynote talk on the like social history of transfusion medicine. So, so it wasn't entirely philatelic, but I did have some philatelic things that I incorporated into the talk just for interest, right? And it's really funny because the feedback I got, because a lot of the audience were not stamp collectors,
right?
So I would show like the first blood donation stamp was issued by Hungary. And so I showed a picture of that one. And afterwards, someone came up to me and thought it was so exotic that I had stamps from Hungary. Where on earth did you get stamps from Hungary?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think, people are interested. I actually hated history in high school. I was a math and science person, and I didn't really like history, but I think it was because I didn't really have any kind of personal investment in it, or maybe the teacher was kind of boring, but now I'm actually, I love the history aspect of philately, right? Like philately gives us this window into what society was like. And I have this other collection on the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. It's a big, it's an international sick children's hospital. They do international research, but I have this collection of letters and illustrated covers and postal stationery cards that they used in their sort of Christmas fundraising campaigns back in the sort of late 1890s to about 1925 or so. And it just really gives you, just by kind of studying the wording on the cards and the way they did their appeals, and it just really gives you a window into what the people were like that were leading the hospital, and what society was like at that time. And I have these cards where it was a card that was sent to a parent that their kid was ready to be picked up, at the hospital, like they were healthy and they were ready to be picked up. So kids would be admitted to hospital and they wouldn't have parents with them, right? Like they just went into this black hole, and then once they were ready, you just went and picked them up. So it was like, it's very different than now, right? But just gives you a really interesting window into, now parents sleep in the same room as the kid, right? But very different back then.
No, that I mean, it just goes to show how important not only the postal history, but the stamps can tell the history of the countries and the history of the world. Which, I mean, if I can segue a bit, you're on the Canada Post Stamp Advisory Committee. So now, looking at these stamps, reading if you will, reading the history of these other countries, you're now selecting what is going to be on the Canadian stamps going forward. What's that like? As much of that as you can talk about.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot the sort of content of our discussions and everything is confidential, but so I've been on the committee since 2018. I think I'm into the 5th year of my term now, and I mean, it was I think shortly before I was invited to join the committee, I had learned about it. I didn't know it existed before that, and I kind of thought, oh, that would be such a cool thing to be on, right? I never dreamt that I would actually be invited to join the committee, but it's been an amazing experience. So, there's supposed to be up to 12. I think right now there's 10 or 11 of us, but there's, people with expertise in history and design. And right now I'm the only person like sort of from the philatelic world. They usually have, they have one or two. When I joined the committee, there were 2 of us, but right now I'm the only one. But so subjects for Canadian stamps, like there are some set issues every year. We have the holiday issues, and there's a flower issue in the spring for weddings and stuff. So there are set issues every year. But for all the other issues, the public can make suggestions for topics, and people on the stamp committee also, our committee also makes suggestions, and we consider all suggestions, and we try and have balance in terms of regional diversity and history versus highlighting people and the landscape of Canada and, sports and entertainment, so, there's a limited number of issues every year. So obviously we can't do everything, but it's been an amazing experience. And just listening to the discussion, I've learned so much, and it's been really eye-opening, and not just the historical aspects, so I've learned so much that way too, but also design aspects. Because a lot of the people who were designers on the committee have actually in the past designed stamps themselves for Canada Post. And the things you have to consider when you're designing something that's going to be on a 1-inch square piece of paper, right? So just the sort of different aspects that you have to consider, and even things like, this font is not in keeping with the era of whatever's being commemorated on the stamp, like stuff that you would never even think of, right? But so it's really cool. So we, once we decide on a topic, the stamp committee, they go and research it and make sure they, get the story right. I think, they really have a focus on telling the story around the stamp issue. And then they commission usually 2 or 3 different designers or design firms, and they each come up with 2 or 3 different concepts. And those all come back to the committee, and we don't know, who's designed what, but they just show us all the different design concepts. And then we have a discussion and we pick, usually it's pretty obvious which one is going to be the winner. And then, sometimes the designers will give suggestions for tweaking this or tweaking that. But yeah, it's a long process. It takes about 2 years. I mean, it's probably the same for the US committee, but it takes about 2 years from when an idea is first, green lighted or greenlit until the stamp actually comes out. So I was actually, when I first joined the committee in 2018, I was very excited, and I was telling all my work colleagues that I'm on the stamp advisory committee, and so one of them actually said to me, "Oh, you should put Till and McCullough on a stamp." So Till and McCullough are these 2 scientists, Jim Till and Ernest McCullough, who really were the fathers of stem cell science. Like, that's the field that I do my research in, and so that kind of triggered, me to go and kind of look, and so I eventually made a proposal to the committee to issue a set of 5 stamps on Canadian medical groundbreakers, which was accepted.
Wow.
And then that issue came out in so I proposed it in June 2018, and the issue came out in September 2020. So right in the midst of the pandemic. It was actually really good time. We had no idea, obviously, when we started, because it was pre-pandemic, but It actually was really good timing in terms of celebrating Canadian medical breakthroughs and milestones. And and I was, because that was sort of something where I had some content expertise too. I was sort of involved with the design process also, just reviewing designs and making sure everything was really correct on the stamp and things like that. So it was really, really amazing experience.
Incredible.
Did those stamps make it into your exhibit?
Yeah.
So yes, a couple of them are, because, so the Till and McCullough stamp talks about stem cells. So I have that in one part of my exhibit. And then one of the other stamps was actually Bruce Chown, who was a hematologist in Winnipeg, who was, his research sort of discovered the basis of RH disease, which affected babies. So babies who are born to RH negative mothers, if the father is RH positive, it caused this sort of allergic or immune reaction. And a lot of babies died because of this, but now it's easily preventable. Moms that are RH negative just get an injection during pregnancy, and it completely prevents it. So he's actually on one of the stamps too, and there's some blood cells with RH, so I talk about RH disease in my exhibit. So I had maybe an ulterior motive.
Yeah. No, I was going to say that's an excellent way. If there's not a stamp depicting something you need for your exhibit, just put your
get on the stamp advisory committee, submit a proposal, and then 2 years later,
Yeah, you'll have the stamps you need. Do you have any of the proofs or the
No,
any of the essays?
no, I
Okay.
wish, no, but no, all of that stuff is with Canada Post. So
Do you find there's an advantage to being a philatelist on the advisory committee over? Does that ever come up in discussions that, hey, they've already done this, or actually, 1937 Canada issued this stamp, and that we can't. I would assume everybody on the committee has to know the Canadian issued stamps previously, right?
So I'm the only person on the committee that has a philatelic background. So
Yeah.
none of the, like the historians and the designers, they don't really know anything about the past stamp program. But the people, the staff, Canada Post staff who are on the stamp committee, they obviously, they have more knowledge of that. Jim Phillips, who, retired, I think 2 years ago now. He'd retired during the pandemic, but he was the head of the, stamp service, like this committee. And he had a huge knowledge because he'd been for years on the, heading the committee. So, so he provided a lot of continuity. And he had really good knowledge. So, but, I do, like, I have obviously more knowledge than people who are not collectors. If a topic has been done before or not. But in addition to that, I think it's also, I provide, some insight maybe into sort of collectors' interests and, I guess it's the collector perspective, right? I'm not sure it has a lot of influence on what we end up picking and the designs and things, but I think it's important for them, I think, to have that input at the table.
Yes. Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to ask, you explained the difference between topical and thematic collecting. And I think that at least in dealing with people, that I talk to in the industry, topical collecting is viewed as a way of maybe getting young people into the hobby, whether it's collecting butterflies or horses or whatever on stamps. I think it's often viewed as a good first entry point for people to get their feet wet. But then there's people like yourself and plenty in the US who take thematic collecting to a whole new level, especially through exhibiting and through books and articles that they write, and sort of elevate what could be viewed as a very simplistic or elementary way of collecting into something that, rivals traditional exhibiting and postal history exhibits in its complexity and its nuance and its storytelling ability. So what do you see sort of as the future of topical and thematic collecting? Because again, there's sort of two parallel levels. I feel there's the very, very, very low end entry level topical collectors, and then again the thematic exhibits I see at shows that are just they blow you away with their archival material and postal history and things that you would never think would help to tell a certain story, all being incorporated, and the exhibit becomes much more than the sum of its parts. So can you sort of talk about that? I don't know if it's a bifurcation, but sort of the difference between entry-level topical collecting and advanced thematic collecting.
Yeah, I mean, certainly topical collecting is a very easy way for new collectors to get into the hobby, especially younger collectors, because they're attracted by the colors and the nice pictures, right? So, that's kind of how I started, right? I mean, obviously I started not as a kid, but I started out really just collecting the stamps. And it was only after I started doing that I realized there was this whole other, aspect to topical or thematic collecting, that there were all these other things that were available that really added interest and could enhance my collection. So not just having stamps, but all this other stuff. And I don't think that's necessarily something that has to be limited to people who are exhibiting. Right? Like if you collect dinosaurs on stamps, there's lots of interesting postmarks and slogans and things like that even if you didn't want to exhibit, you could still collect those. And I think, the sort of class of topical exhibits versus thematic exhibits was developed as a way to try and encourage people who'd really just had topical collections, right, to start exhibiting and experience exhibiting, where you don't really have to have all these tangential storylines. You're just sort of categorizing your stuff I think of it kind of like as an illustrated catalog, right? So you can have different chapters that show different aspects, but all of the stuff shows pictures of whatever your topic is. But I think, thematic collecting and thematic exhibiting in particular, I don't know if traditional collectors, if they don't really understand thematic exhibiting, kind of view thematics or topics or topical collecting as kind of this more, it's for younger collectors or not serious collectors, really, where it's not kind of like a serious philatelic pursuit. But I've also heard, experienced collectors or experienced exhibitors say that, they may have postal history exhibit or traditional exhibit, but they've never tried a thematic exhibit because they actually found that it's actually one of the most difficult types of exhibits to put together. And I think people might be intimidated by thematic exhibiting because they kind of think, oh, there's all these rules around what you can include or not include, but really thematic exhibiting, I think is actually a very accessible kind of exhibiting because you're telling a story. So the most important thing is you have to decide what story you're going to tell, and it should be a non-philatelic story, right? So it's not focusing on the stamps or the postal history, the roots or the markings or anything. You pick some non-philatelic story, and then you can pull in everything to illustrate your story. So you can pull in postal history, you can pull in traditional stuff, right? All these pre-production proofs and archival material, you can pull in postal stationery. So you really have like everything available to you to illustrate this story. And I think actually it's like, for me anyway, although I have to say I only have one other exhibit, which is my Sick Kids exhibit, but so I don't have a lot of experience in exhibiting different classes. But when I go to a show, I like looking at the thematic exhibits because, to me, it's like I like looking at the the story, the non-philatelic story, and seeing how the exhibitor has illustrated that story and the different kinds of things that they've used to illustrate the story. And sometimes you see really kind of like surprising things that you wouldn't expect to see, right? But they've made this really interesting connection. So I think that's really where you can be creative. And
well, I think in a way, it is more difficult because if you're putting together a traditional exhibit, you've got your pre-production material, your mint stamps, your multiples, your used stamps, and your covers, and it's sort of a given framework. Whereas with something like blood or whatever topic it may be, you go to a stamp show and it's always so varied. It's coconuts or lions or whatever, and there's really no rule book. Whereas traditional philately, there's certain expectations that you'll have.
There's
the
a
essays
recipe,
and the proofs.
right?
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas when it comes to tackling coconuts on stamps, I wouldn't know the first place. And they always start at such a creative. They'll start with these the history of. It always amazes me. So yeah, I think that certainly makes it a more diverse and interesting way to exhibit. That there's no one's done it before you.
And in fact, if you can come up with a new angle or a new way to, I was listening to, so Milkopex happened last weekend or the weekend before, and they as a show theme, they had like thematics. And so they had a bunch of seminars on thematics, collecting and exhibiting. And one exhibitor from Israel has a fantastic thematic exhibit about chess. And, it's really interesting because he was telling the story that, he started out collecting chess stamps, and then he decided he was going to try his hand at exhibiting. And he talked to a friend who basically told him that all the exhibits he had seen about chess were kind of boring because they, basically showed all the chess pieces, and then they, sort of listed all the grandmasters and then all the chess Olympiads. And it was kind of just like a catalog, right? And it wasn't very interesting. And if he was going to, make an interesting exhibit, he had to find a new angle for this. And so what he's done is he's compared chess to war. And so chess as the game of war, right? Because games are made to kind of imitate life. And so chess as a game, and there's a lot of like military terms in chess, right? You attack, you defend, so his whole exhibit is illustrating what happens in chess and then the equivalent of what happens in real life war. So it's like really,
wow.
interesting, right? So it's just a new way of telling that story. So I think, thematics gives you that opportunity to kind of pick something that, maybe like a lot of people collect chess, right? But he came up with like an interesting way to tell that story. And so I think that's where thematics can be really strong, right? You can just use your imagination and you're not limited by, as long as you can show or make a link to your story with the postal aspect of, a philatelic item, then you can use it to illustrate your story, right? So you're not limited by anything, and I have to say, I have a huge diversity of stuff in my exhibit. I've learned so much, and I find it really cool to learn about, I have postal stationery from Liberia. I have, just a recent addition is a Red Cross Society cover from Trinidad, where it was franked with a Cinderella label that was given postal privilege for one day. So like really cool stuff. Like I just love finding out stuff like this, right? And then figuring out a way to put them in my exhibits. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Speaking of, you so graciously have prepared some slides for us from your exhibit. If you wouldn't mind screen sharing them now.
Sure. So let me see if I can do this. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So so I just, I just pulled out a few examples from my exhibit. This is the title page of my exhibit. So it just tells the story about blood. And this is just a close-up of the plan. So you can see that it's just, it's split into 5 chapters. And I talk about the history of blood, the symbolism of blood, how transfusion medicine began, how our blood supply is supported, how we recruit donors, the whole process of donating blood, and then all the things that blood is used for. So it goes through this sort of story through the whole exhibit. So
and
this
exhibit was the one that just won a reserve grant, you said?
Yeah, so I've won the grand at a couple of national shows in Canada. And the first time was in Campex in 2019. That was the first time a thematic exhibit had ever won a grand at a regular national show in Canada.
Really? Wow.
So I think, I really want to show people that, thematics is like really, it can be serious, take it seriously, right? It's not just a kids game kind of thing. So yeah, and I showed it at CPEX and it got the reserve grant at CPEX. So this is just a page in, I think, the first chapter, where I talk. So on this page, I'm talking about, so Galen was a physician who had a lot of influence in, 2nd century, and he taught a lot of medical about medicine and anatomy, and of course some of his ideas were okay, a lot of his ideas were wrong. And one of the things that he didn't really understand about the circulation and how the blood circulated and that the heart was a pump. He actually thought, blood was kind of generated by the liver and it fed the body and it would kind of ebb and flow. And they knew that there was arterial blood and venous blood, that because it was different color. But he thought, rather than kind of going in a circuit around the body, he thought that arterial and venous blood kind of mixed through these tiny holes in the septum, the sort of muscular wall that divides the 2 sides of the heart. So to illustrate that, it's kind of a hard, there's no stamp that shows that, right? But what I decided to do was to use a perfin in the form of a heart, right? So talking about holes in the heart. So, so here's holes, which are these initials inside a heart. So, this is my, this is where I geek out, right? Like finding these kind of cool philatelic metaphors to issue or to illustrate different parts of my story. So that's one thing. I actually emailed the Perfin Society to get some information about the early and late dates of this particular perfin, and I think I missed the earliest known date by 3 days. But it was the first example on this particular face value stamp, so that was kind of cool.
How difficult was it to get that stamp?
To get this stamp?
Yeah.
So I think what I did was I went on Del Camp and I Googled heart perfin. And
Okay.
this happened to be one of the lots that popped up. So, and
Oh,
it wasn't
wow.
horribly expensive either. So I was really lucky because since then I've gone back to look a couple times and there haven't been any more. So, you know, just
Mhm.
sometimes your timing and everything
Yeah.
just works out perfectly. So that one, you know, that was like a relatively inexpensive addition. And then I had the chance to buy this artwork for this stamp from Nigeria, which shows like a cross section of the heart anatomy. And the really cool thing, you know, and so this is where I think I have maybe an advantage over someone who's not medical, because I looked at that picture and it just didn't look right to me. So here is how the heart anatomy is normally drawn. So I'm not going to go into the details or anything, but the artist has basically gotten it backwards. So he's flipped the right side and the left side and just gotten the where the blood vessels attached backwards, right? Oh, so I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but the aorta is arching to the left here, and normally it should be arching to the right on the picture here. So, you know, so it's just backwards. So I take advantage of that to say that, you know, Galen got his anatomy wrong, and here's, you know, the design of the anatomy is also wrong on this piece of artwork. So. Okay, and then I've got a chapter where I talk about the blood groups and how the blood groups are inherited. So I thought one cool way to kind of illustrate how the blood groups are, like the genetic inheritance of the blood group, would be to use these non-denominated US stamps and put them together the way the genes would be put together, right? So A, B, and I didn't, you know, there's only A, B, C, and D for these stamps. So I didn't have A, B, and O, but actually O, initially Landsteiner actually just called them A, B, and C, and only later C was changed to O. So I'm taking a little bit of a liberty here, but I do mention that, you know, C represents O here. So it just shows the different inheritance of the blood groups here. And then this stamp, so, you know, I mentioned before that a lot of countries issued kind of like, you know, millennium, you know, events of the millennium kind stamp. So Guyana did that too. And one of the stamps, they also showed Landsteiner, and they showed these blood grouping cards. So these are the different blood groups. This is what it's supposed to look like. So I mean, I won't go into the details, but basically the pattern should be smooth or speckled for A or B. And so in blood group A and in blood group B, you should have one speckled and one solid or smooth. Whereas in AB, you have two speckled, and in O, you have two smooth, but they got it backwards on this stamp. So A, you've got the one speckled and smooth there, but and you've got the two speckled on AB here, but they've actually mixed up the O and B blood groups. So, you know, this is, again, a tiny detail, but I use it in a page of my exhibit where I say, you know, you have to be really careful when you're blood typing, and you can't make mistakes in blood typing. So, you know, here's a stamp where they made a mistake in the blood typing, right? So just stuff like this. This is the Trinidad cover that I mentioned, where a lot of the colonies, they wanted to send out these circulars to raise money, like to all the plantation owners and stuff. And they asked the governor if they could, you know, do it for free. And the governor agreed, and the postmaster general agreed. But before they could send out instructions to the post offices, they mailed out all these envelopes that just had the label on it. And so the postmaster actually instructed the sending post office to actually postmark the label, which happened to be just the correct value for sending an printed matter letter, so that the letters wouldn't be taxed at the arriving post offices. And so this is the label. Yeah. And this is the circular that was included. So this is, you know, it's a page where I'm talking about Red Cross societies being the organizations that do a lot of the blood collecting from donors. But I have this really, you know, instead of just showing a stamp with a Red Cross or something on it, which are very common, you know, just having this really cool postal history item where there was a label that was given postal privilege for one day only, for like basically one mailing of 900 letters, is pretty cool.
That is really cool.
And then just, this is the last thing I'll show from my exhibit, but I have a page where I talk about the different uses of you know, blood for patients. And One big need is cancer patients who get chemotherapy or radiation because, you know, the chemotherapy and radiation damages their own blood forming cells in the bone marrow. And so they're reliant on transfusions until their bone marrow cells can recover. And so I used to have, I think, an envelope that had a picture of a radiator or something. But it occurred to me that, you know, if I could find like maybe a radiated cover or, you know, piece of irradiated mail, because I think I was looking through something and on an exhibit on disinfected covers, and they had some examples of sort of these irradiated covers that were, it was during the anthrax, you know, after 9/11, there was that anthrax scare where anthrax spores were sent through the mail. So
Right.
in certain areas, they actually they collected and irradiated the mail before they delivered it. So not only was I able to find a piece of irradiated mail, but this particular, you know, plastic bag that the mail was inserted into says, you know, any biological samples such as blood, etc., could be rendered useless. So it's wording that perfectly fits with my story, saying that the bone marrow cells are, you know, when they're irradiated, they basically are rendered useless, right? And patients need transfusions. So anyway, that was,
Wow.
I think that's the last thing I'm showing from my exhibit. And so this is my thread on stamp board. So actually, when I started my exhibit in 2014, I just posted it. I didn't really have anything in mind at that point, but I just posted all my pages. It was only 2 frames at that point. And ever since then, I've been kind of putting updates in the thread. So anybody, you know, who wants to can go to this link and they can just follow the progression of my exhibit from, you know, whenever I added new things in or whatever, I've been posting updates. So anybody that's interested can go and have a look there.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's like yeah. History of the exhibit itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
And these are all, you know, when I talked about thinking outside the box and saying things that just come out of left field but make perfect sense once you see them. The use of the anthrax irradiated mail to explain, again, the fact that you've brought all these diverse perfins and just odds and ends together, but they all tell such a cohesive story, I think is very emblematic of what I was trying to ask you about earlier. I think this is a good segue for people who want to learn more, though. You have another talk coming up. I was on a panel with the Collectors Club last night, and they were all very excited to mention it. So why don't you let people know where they can hear you speak more about this topic in just a couple of weeks?
So I think it's early November, November 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm giving a presentation to the Collectors Club. I sat beside Larry Haber at GAS in Chicago, I guess two GASs ago now. And at that show, so my exhibit was in the Champion of Champions because it had won the grand at Campex a year or two before. So we were just talking about thematic exhibiting. So I'm going to make a presentation to the Collectors Club, sort of like a basic introduction to thematic and, you know, topical and thematic collecting. But I think I'm going to spend some time talking about how thematic exhibitors can use creativity and innovation to kind of bring in elements from more traditional branches of philately, like, you know, traditional or postal history or postal stationery, to illustrate their story and how you can really have a lot of fun with that. So I'll be showing examples from my exhibit that are different from the ones I just showed you now. So if people are interested, please tune in.
And those talks are open for non-Collectors Club members as well. All you have to do is register on their website beforehand. So we encourage everyone to log into that on November 2nd and learn more about the development of this collection.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jean, thank you so much for joining us. This has been, really informative, not only on the history of blood itself, but on the evolution of between topical and thematic collecting and how, you know, you can really take a thematic exhibit and explain the history of just absolutely anything.
And to be fair, it's a topic that makes me a bit squeamish, but the way you've handled it is very informative and very fascinating. And I didn't feel faint at all when you shared those images. So no, the way you've tackled it is fantastic. But no, thank you again. Yeah, I think with thematic exhibiting in particular, the subject matter, it really is. You go to a show and you look at all thematic exhibits. You don't even have to be that personally invested in the subject to learn so much. Whereas if you go into a postal history exhibit, you kind of know what you're going to get. Whereas, you know, an exhibit like this, you learn about blood, which you don't go into a stamp show, I don't think, expecting to come out a more well-rounded scientist. So that's what I love, is that regardless of the topic, everyone puts their own spin on it, acquires, again, I don't want to say oddball material, but unexpected material that contributes to the grand narrative. And I think you've really obviously, you know, if the judges have anything to say, really demonstrated that over the last few years.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I mean, when I go to a show, I also look at other, you know, I look at the traditional exhibits too, because I'm always looking for things that I could maybe, you know, bring into my exhibit as well. So, you know, we learn from others, right? That's the great thing about organized philately. You know, before, I would say in the last 10 years, all of the stuff that I've been doing in the last 10 years has, you know, just opened up whole new worlds to me. And it's been so rewarding compared to how I collected. You know, I kind of think of like before organized philately and after organized philately. You know, I was on my own and, you know, connecting with people on the internet, but not really in the same way. So it's been a really great journey, I guess.
No, yeah, I mean, I completely get that. It's given you the opportunity to learn even more about what you were interested in and then expand upon that. So to say that you go and look at the non-thematic exhibits to try and better your thematic exhibit, that wouldn't exist without organized philately. So even if you were to kind of build exhibits but not exhibit them on your own, you need that outside source in order to help you know, build your collection, build your interests, and kind of guide along that path.
And I'm really trying to you know, give back, right? So, you know, I received a lot of encouragement at the beginning, so I'm really trying to encourage people who've never tried thematics, or people maybe who have been topical collectors but never thought about exhibiting, you know, just to take that first step, right? Because I think you always get kind of intimidated when you look at the end product, but, you know, it's really a process. And I could never, I mean, you should, you know, if you go and look at that website, you'll see there's a big difference between when I started and where my exhibit is now. And it's been a gradual process.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. You've been working you had 2 panels in 2014, and you've been working on this for the past 8 years. And now do you finally feel like you're getting to a stage where it's nearing completion, or do you feel like you've still got a long way to go?
Yeah, so I mean, I've had a lot of success at the national level.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how much further I can take it at the national level, but I'm now finally, I think I have the confidence that, you know, I can probably go that next step, which is to international.
Yeah.
So I've actually applied to show my exhibit at IBRA in Essen, Germany next May. So if it's accepted, that will be the first time I'm showing it at an international show.
Wow.
So, you know, and so you have to keep it at 5 frames for international, but then if you achieve a certain meta level, then you can expand it to 8 frames, which will be a huge amount of work to, you know, add another 3 frames. But yeah, it's been, you know, I would say it's been totally a labor of love. Like every time I've shown the exhibit, I think I'm on the, I don't know, 13th or 14th version of it. Every time I show it, there's always been changes. Like I've always added new things in or changed pages around or whatever. So I'm still, you know, always looking for things to add to the exhibit. And, you know, the next big step is going to be going from 5 to 8, but that's, you know, I kind of don't even want to think about that right now. It's going to be a lot of work, but it's been fun. So I've really enjoyed it. And I've learned so much. Not only I've learned a lot about my own topic, like a lot of the history and stuff. you know, you don't learn that stuff in medical school. You learn how to use blood to treat patients, but you don't really learn about the history and the societal, you know, the social history. So I learned a lot that way, just researching my exhibit, but also just, you know, all the different items that I've brought into my exhibit, I researched them and I've learned a lot about different aspects of philately. So, you know, they're obviously, I don't know as much as someone who specializes in whatever that area is, but it's been really interesting to me just to learn about different aspects of philately, and things show up when I least expect them. Like I belong to a few stamp clubs, and I listen to online talks and stuff and show and tells and things will pop up that I, you know, hadn't even thought of, but when I look at it, I go, oh, I can use that to illustrate some aspect of my story, right? Some, you know, there was a show and tell in December for the postal or the Philatelic Specialist Society of Canada. And somebody showed these Liberian postal stationery cards where the indicium had been scratched out, said President Johnson, and someone had scratched out the indicium before they postmarked it. And it was a really interesting story. And then I thought, oh, I could kind of use that to illustrate how blood donors are anonymous, right? Because you're anonymizing the indicium. So, you know, so things pop up when you least expect them. And so it's just fun. Anyway, I've probably droned on longer than.
No. Thank you so much.
Thank you again so much for joining us. We've really enjoyed this, and we're looking forward to November 2nd.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for having me, and it's been great chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll put a link to the stamp boards page in the description.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks guys.
So much.
All right. Bye.
Michael, I really enjoyed that. We've spoken to other topical collectors before, and thematic collectors. The one that comes to mind is Greg, another Canadian, Greg Redner, who does the Olympics, specifically the Antwerp Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
But I really enjoyed this. You know, I've seen the blood exhibit before. I'm not sure I've studied it as much as I should have. Now, after talking to Jean, I want to take a whole new look at it with a new set of eyes. But no, I think this was really fascinating to learn more. You know, especially as topical and thematic collecting becomes, again, I think a lot of people use it as a way to get people involved in the hobby.
Yeah.
Certainly having the ATA's annual convention combined with APS Stamp Show is fantastic. Having a larger representation from the ATA, you know, Great American Stamp Show every year. So no, I think this is just a really wonderful conversation that highlights an important part of the hobby.
Yeah, and to watch her journey over, she said she didn't start topical collecting, you know, up until 10 years ago, she was collecting countries, Canada, Germany, Singapore. She said, but then 10 years ago, she started topical collecting, and then 8 years ago, she started building this thematic collection. And it's been a journey of over 8 years, winning a number of different awards, and she still feels like there's work to be done. Mm-hmm. It's just, you know, that it's just as intricate and it's just as complicated as any other facet of the hobby, and it's I'm glad that her collection is being recognized in such a in such a high regard, and I'm excited to go look at the stamp boards page and see how it's evolved over the years, over the past 8 years.
Absolutely.
From just 2 frames to, you know, as many as she has now, and then see what the results are when she takes it overseas to Germany.
Absolutely. No, I can't wait to see that as well. This was a really fun episode. Glad to be back doing this again. As always, you can find us Google, Apple, Spotify podcasts. We're both on Twitter. People tag me and stuff. I try and look at it as often as possible. philatelypodcast@gmail.com if you want to reach out. philatelypodcast.com to find back episodes. And Michael, I'm looking forward to doing it again real soon.
Yeah. Talk to you then.
Absolutely, man.
See ya.